Hey, today we are continuing on our herb series and we're going to talk about wattle today and the spirit of wattle. Now, I'm living in the lands of Amaru as I record this, and wattle seed is often associated with being like the national plant of these lands, which is pretty special. And it comes from what we would call the acacia family. There's over 1,000 types of species that grow in the lands of Amaru as of today. And it's often called the seed of endurance because it can thrive in such harsh conditions. We're talking drought, fire, extreme wind conditions. And it's often one of the first plants to return after there's been a large fire. So it's also can be seen as a symbol of rebirth and renewal. Now, for many First Nations or First Peoples of Australia, they, depending on which mobs you're talking to, they would often associate wattle as being deeply woven into their life, into their culture, into their law, the LORE, providing a lot of food, medicine, tools, and ceremony with that plant. And today, that legacy is still continued with Wattleseed, which is really beautiful to observe and to be part of it in certain ways. Now, when we're looking at the physical benefits of Wattleseed, before I get any further, I want to remind you I'm not a medical practitioner. I'm not saying that if you take Wattleseed, you're going to cure X, Y, and Z. I'm saying that Wattleseed is associated with these particular things, and therefore it may assist you with X, Y, and Z. If you're pregnant and or on medication and or breastfeeding, then do your research as to whether it's safe to introduce this plant into your body and your being. You can still work with these plants even if you don't actually physically ingest them as well. I'd like to remind you that. Now, when wattle seed is roasted, it can have a bit of an aroma like chocolate, hazelnut, coffee, which is really interesting. And I'm going to be focusing today on when you're having it as a tea. You can also have it as a condiment as well with your food, and then there's various other ways in which you can use it. So when we're looking at the physical potential benefits of wattle seed, we're looking at things like sustaining energy. It's got really good digestive support. It's also very high in particular nutrients, and it's got a very much like a sort of caffeine-free kind of grounding effects that it can have on the body, which is really beautiful, right? Because some of us are aware or they're really sensitive to caffeine and how it affects us. So for some of us who don't drink caffeine, there's times when we're like, we need a caffeine-free drink that gives us some of the more elements of the caffeine, but with less detrimental effects on the body and the being. Now, we're looking at the emotional and mental effects that this plant, the wattle seed itself, can have on us. We're often drinking it because we're requiring resilience and also nourishment. So it also teaches patience as well, that good things grow slowly, deeply, and beneath the surface. So people will often use it for grounding, when they're under a lot of stress or going through a lot of change. It can also help with strengthening kind of like emotional endurance, especially when going through some quite intense challenges and transitions. And it can also help with cultivating gratitude and connection to the land as well. As with any plants, I think that's often something that is forgotten about how when we actually ingest something from the land, it then connects us back to that land which it's grown from. Now, when we're looking at things like the metaphysical, the more energetic, etherical aspects that this plant can have and play with us, we're looking at things like how it connects in predominantly with, when we're looking at the chakras and the points of the body, the root and the solar. Now, as some of you may be aware, there's actually an area on the lands of Amaru that's often associated with being the solar plexus of the planet, which is really beautiful. So I'm not surprised in how many of the plants here can be associated with the solar plexus. And so when we're looking at the root and the solar together, looking at things like stability, strength, and personal power. And it's very much also a teacher of cycles. So reminding us to live with the cyclical nature of life. And, we're talking about things like life, death, renewal, or if we're not living in that way, it's the reminder that everything is always going through a cycle. And it's the seasons, we're always going through seasons. There's always this kind of ending before there's another beginning that's to arise. And when we're looking at some of the cultural and lore stories of Wattleseed and the nations here, I'd like to remind you there's more than 500 different nations here, and they all have their own cultural stories and ways in which they work with Wattleseed. So what I'm about to share here is not necessarily, going to be true for all nations. This is just some similarities of their stories that we're able to weave together. And we're looking at things like how these stories that they have with the plants and with the law that they have, that they are really sacred, and not all stories are told to the full extent that can be shared or that is allowed to be shared. So, when you hear stories that are told, you will be receiving a certain level of maybe what we might call in modern culture, certain level of layers of the story. You may not be told all of the layers of the story because there's so many permissions, I could say, that are to be granted before that must be shared. And so, there's an engagement of where are you at, what part of the stories are important for you to hear and to learn and to know, and then what parts do they not have permission to give to you and are not going to be received in a way where you fully understand of what is actually being expressed. That's the best way I can describe that. With the respect of wattle, a lot of the stories are about a plant of it being about connection, renewal, and belonging. And it's beautiful when you also look at its flower. It's yellow. It's representing the sun. Again, it's that solar plexus energy, reflecting like the sun's vitality and the resilience of the land. There's this bright hope that comes after maybe a dark chapter or a dark season. And that's all I can really share today in regards to wattle. And I'm sure if you sat with certain mob and certain elders, then you may get to learn some more of the cultural lore of the plant. So yes, if you've got any questions, welcome to leave that in the comment section below. You can also find me on various other social media platforms. The links are in the description box. And I'll see you again soon.